The courtroom feels different today. There's a tension in the air that even the bailiff can sense as he stands a little straighter near the judge's bench. Judge Frank Caprio sits in his familiar chair, reading glasses perched on his nose, flipping through a thick case file with the kind of careful attention he brings to every single person who walks through his doors. He pauses. His eyebrows lift slightly. Something in this file has caught his attention, and those who know him well recognize that look, the mixture of curiosity and concern that always precedes one of his most memorable hearings. The courtroom doors swing open, and the defendant enters with an energy that immediately commands attention. She's young, maybe 23 or 24, dressed in designer clothes that look out of place in Providence Municipal Court. Her handbag probably costs more than most people in this room make in a month. Her heels click sharply against the tile floor as she walks to the defendant's table, her posture rigid with what could be confidence or defiance, it's hard to tell which. Her attorney, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, follows closely behind, already wearing the expression of someone who expects this to be quick and painless. Judge Caprio looks up from the file, and his eyes meet hers. For a moment, there's silence. He has that way of seeing people, really seeing them, that makes even the most guarded individuals feel exposed. The young woman shifts her weight, crossing her arms. The judge's expression remains gentle, but observant. "Good morning," Caprio says, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that has made him beloved far beyond the borders of Rhode Island. "Please step forward and state your name for the record." She approaches the podium with deliberate slowness, as if the very act of complying is beneath her. "Madison Ashworth," she says, and even those two words carry an edge. Her tone suggests she's used to her name opening doors, commanding respect, getting her what she wants. Judge Caprio nods, writing something down. "Miss Ashworth. And you're here today regarding..." He glances at the file again, multiple parking violations, failure to appear for previous court dates, and contempt charges for ignoring court orders. "Is that correct?" "I guess so," Madison replies, examining her nails. Her attorney touches her elbow gently, a warning, but she ignores him. The judge removes his glasses, folding them carefully. This is one of his tells when the glasses come off, he's shifting into a different mode. Not angry, never angry, but deeply engaged. "You guess so?" He repeats, his voice still soft but now carrying a hint of something else. "Concern, perhaps. Or disappointment." "Ms. Ashworth, these aren't suggestions. These are legal obligations. You've accumulated over $4,000 in parking fines over the past 18 months, and you've missed 3 scheduled court appearances. Help me understand what's happening here." Madison sighs dramatically, the kind of sigh that suggests this entire proceeding is a waste of her valuable time. "Look, I had things to do. I'm busy. I can't keep track of every little parking meter in this city. And the court dates? I had conflicts. Important conflicts." A murmur ripples through the courtroom gallery. A few people exchange glances. Judge Caprio's courtroom attracts regular attendees, people who come to watch because they've seen his viral videos, because they believe in what he represents, or simply because they've never seen justice administered with such humanity. They sense something building here, though they can't yet tell what form it will take. The judge leans forward slightly, his elbows on the bench, his hands clasped together. It's his thinking pose, the position he takes when he's about to dig deeper. "Important conflicts," he repeats, not mockingly, just thoughtfully. "What kind of conflicts are we talking about? Work? School? Family obligations?" Madison's jaw tightens. "Does it matter? I'm here now, aren't I? Can't we just pay the fines and be done with this? My father's office said they'd take care of it." She reaches into her handbag, pulling out a checkbook with casual indifference. "How much do you want?" The courtroom goes very quiet. Even the court reporter's fingers pause over the keys. It's the kind of moment that feels like a crack forming in ice. You can hear it, feel it, sense that something is about to break through. Judge Caprio doesn't move. He simply looks at her, his expression unchanged but his eyes revealing a deeper assessment taking place. He's seen thousands of defendants over his decades on the bench, the scared, the defiant, the broken, the arrogant. But there's something about Madison Ashworth that doesn't quite fit the picture she's presenting. Something in the way her hands shake slightly as she holds that checkbook. Something in the brittleness of her bravado. "Miss Ashworth," he says, his voice dropping to that gentle register that has become his trademark, "put the checkbook away for a moment. Money isn't what this is about. What I want is to understand. You mentioned your father's office. Your last name is Ashworth. Would that be Senator David Ashworth?" Madison's face hardens. "Yes. My father is Senator Ashworth. And if this is about to become some kind of political thing—" "No, no," Caprio interrupts, raising a hand gently. "Nothing political. I don't care about politics in my courtroom. I care about people. But I want to understand your situation. Being the daughter of a public figure, that must come with its own pressures, its own challenges. Tell me about your life, Madison. What do you do? Where do you live? Why does that matter?" She shoots back, and now there's something raw in her voice, something that wasn't there before. "I'm just here to pay a fine. I'm not here for therapy." Her attorney leans in, whispering urgently in her ear. She shakes her head, pulling away from him. The judge watches this interaction with keen interest, saying nothing, letting the moment breathe. Finally, Caprio speaks again, and his tone is even softer now, almost fatherly. "Miss Ashworth, I've been doing this job for a very long time. And I've learned that when someone comes into my courtroom acting like they don't care, like rules don't apply to them, like they just want to throw money at a problem and disappear, usually, that's not the whole story. Usually, there's something else going on. Something painful. Something they don't want to talk about." He pauses, letting his words settle. "So I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to really think about your answer. What's really happening here? Talk to me." Madison stares at him, her jaw clenched, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears that she's fighting desperately to hold back. The checkbook trembles in her hand. The mask she walked in with is starting to crack, and everyone in the courtroom can see it happening in real time. The silence stretches out for what feels like an eternity. Judge Caprio doesn't break it. He's learned over the years that sometimes the most powerful thing he can do is simply wait, simply create space for truth to emerge. He sits back in his chair, his expression patient and open, giving Madison Ashworth all the time she needs. Finally, she looks down at the checkbook in her hands, then back up at the judge. When she speaks, her voice is different, smaller, more vulnerable. "You want to know what I do? I don't do anything. Not anymore." She laughs, but it's a bitter sound without humor. "I dropped out of law school 6 months ago. I haven't told my father yet. He still thinks I'm at Georgetown, thinks I'm on track to graduate this spring, thinks I'm going to join his old firm and make something of myself." The attorney beside her shifts uncomfortably, clearly hearing some of this for the first time. Judge Caprio nods slowly, processing this information. "So these parking tickets, these court dates you missed, they all happened here in Providence, not in Washington, D.C. You've been living here, not at school." "I've been staying at my grandmother's old house," Madison admits, her defiance deflating with each word. "The one on Benefit Street. It's been empty since she died 2 years ago. My parents wanted to sell it, but they haven't gotten around to it. I have keys. Nobody knows I'm there." "And why Providence?" Caprio asks gently. "Why come back here instead of staying in Washington? What made you leave law school?" Madison's composure finally breaks. A tear escapes down her cheek, and she wipes it away angrily, as if betrayed by her own emotions. "Because I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be her. The perfect daughter. The senator's pride and joy. The girl who was going to change the world. Her voice cracks. I couldn't breathe there. Every time I walked into a classroom, every time someone recognized my last name, I felt this weight, this expectation. My father's career, his reputation, his legacy, it was all on my shoulders. And I was drowning. Judge Caprio's expression softens even further. He leans forward again, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me about your grandmother. The one whose house you're staying in. Were you close to her? The question clearly catches Madison off guard. Her eyes widen slightly, and fresh tears well up. She was the only person who ever let me just be me. Not Senator Ashworth's daughter. Not the future lawyer. Not the perfect image. Just Madison. She pauses, struggling to maintain control. She lived in Providence her whole life. Never wanted to be in Washington, never cared about politics or status. She taught elementary school for 40 years. Her house is full of books and art supplies and photographs of students she taught. She was real. And when she died, Caprio says, not as a question but as an understanding, you lost the one place where you could be yourself. Madison nods, unable to speak for a moment. The courtroom is completely still. Even the bailiff, a stern man who's seen everything in his 20 years on the job, has softened his stance, drawn into this unfolding story like everyone else. The judge glances down at the case file again, reading something carefully. Madison, these parking tickets, I'm looking at the locations. Hospital parking lots. Repeated violations at Rhode Island Hospital, Miriam Hospital, women and infants. And they're not just random. They're the same locations, over and over, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. What were you doing at these hospitals? Madison's attorney stands up suddenly. Your Honor, I'm not sure that's relevant to. Sit down, Counselor, Caprio says, not unkindly but firmly. I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom. He returns his attention to Madison. What were you doing there? Talk to me. Madison takes a shaky breath, and when she speaks, her words come out in a rush, as if she's been holding them in for too long. I volunteer. In the pediatric units. I read to sick kids. I bring art supplies. I sit with families in the waiting rooms when they get bad news. I'm there 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes more. I started going after my grandmother died because I couldn't stand being alone in that empty house, and I remembered how she used to talk about her students, how much purpose it gave her. So I went to the hospital and asked if they needed volunteers, and they said yes, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Not because of my last name. Not because it would look good on a resume. But because it was real. Because those kids needed someone, and I could be that someone. Judge Caprio removes his reading glasses completely now, setting them on the bench. His eyes are glistening slightly. And the parking tickets? Why didn't you just pay the meters? Because I'd lose track of time, Madison says, her voice steadier now, as if the confession is liberating her. I'd be reading to a little girl going through chemo, or holding the hand of a boy who was scared before surgery, or teaching them how to paint, and hours would pass. I'd forget about everything: the meter, the time, my phone. And by the time I'd get back to my car, there'd be a ticket. At first, I paid them. But then they kept coming, and I'd get back to that empty house and feel so overwhelmed by everything I was hiding from school, my parents, my failure, that I'd just throw the tickets in a drawer. Then the court dates came, and I couldn't face them because facing them meant facing everything else. It meant admitting that I'd built this whole secret life, that I was lying to everyone who thought I was in D.C. The judge is quiet for a long moment, processing everything he's hearing. Then he asks, does your father know any of this? Does he know you're here? That you left school? Madison shakes her head. He thinks I'm studying for finals. He calls every Sunday, and I tell him about classes I'm not taking, professors I don't have, study groups that don't exist. I've become an expert liar. She looks directly at Judge Caprio now, and there's a plea in her eyes. I know I messed up. I know I should have dealt with this differently. But I didn't know how to stop the lie without everything falling apart. And now it has anyway, hasn't it? This hearing is going to be public record. He's going to find out. Everyone's going to find out. Judge Caprio stands up slowly, something he rarely does in the middle of a hearing. He walks to the side of the bench, closer to where Madison is standing, though still separated by the formal distance of the courtroom. Madison, look at me, he says, and his voice carries such gentle authority that she immediately meets his eyes. You're not a bad person. You're a young woman who's been carrying a burden that no one should have to carry alone. The expectations, the pressure, the grief over your grandmother, the fear of disappointing your father, that's a lot. That's more than a lot. And instead of falling apart completely, you found a way to give something back. You found purpose in serving others. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. But I broke the law, Madison whispers. Multiple times. I ignored court orders. I showed contempt for the system. Isn't that what matters here? What matters, Caprio says, walking back to his seat but keeping his eyes on her, is the whole picture. Yes, you made mistakes. Yes, there are consequences. But I'm not interested in punishing someone who's already punishing themselves. I'm interested in understanding and helping. Judge Caprio settles back into his chair, but the atmosphere in the courtroom has fundamentally shifted. What began as a routine hearing about an entitled young woman has transformed into something far more complex and human. The judge picks up his pen, tapping it thoughtfully against the bench as he considers his next question. Madison, he begins, his voice taking on an even gentler quality, I want to go back to something you said about your grandmother. You said she taught elementary school for 40 years. What was her name? Madison seems surprised by the question. Rose. Rose Ashworth. Well, technically Rose Castellano before she married my grandfather. She taught at William Debate Elementary School on the East Side. The judge's face lights up with recognition, and he actually smiles, a genuine expression of warmth. Rose Castellano? From Federal Hill originally? When Madison nods, astonished, Caprio continues, your grandmother taught my nephew. This would have been, 30 years ago now. He had a learning disability, struggled with reading, and his parents were worried sick about him. Rose stayed after school with him 3 days a week for an entire year, no extra pay, just because she believed in him. He's a teacher himself now, working in Massachusetts. He still talks about Mrs. Ashworth. Madison's hand goes to her mouth, fresh tears streaming down her face now without restraint. She did that all the time. The house is full of letters from former students and their parents. She kept every single one. When I'm there at night, sometimes I read them. They all say the same thing, that she saw something in them when no one else did. That she made them believe in themselves. And now you're doing the same thing, Caprio observes, in those hospital rooms. Reading to children who are fighting battles no child should have to fight. Sitting with scared families. Bringing art and light into dark places. You're more like your grandmother than you probably realize. But she wasn't running away from anything, Madison counters, her voice heavy with self-recrimination. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't lying to her family. She lived with integrity. I'm just a coward who couldn't handle the pressure. Judge Caprio shakes his head slowly. You're not a coward. A coward wouldn't be standing here right now being honest with me. A coward wouldn't spend hours volunteering with sick children. A coward wouldn't face the truth about themselves the way you're doing right now. He pauses, consulting his notes again. I want to understand something else. You said your father calls every Sunday. What do those conversations look like? What does he talk about? Madison wipes her eyes with the back of her hand, her expensive composure completely abandoned now. He talks about his work. The bills he's sponsoring. The committees he's on. The political battles he's fighting. And then he asks about school, about my grades, about whether I'm networking with the right people, whether I'm setting myself up for the right clerkships after graduation. Every conversation is about achievement, about building the future, about living up to the Ashworth name. She takes a shaky breath. He loved my grandmother, I know he did, but he was always a little embarrassed by her too. She never wanted to leave Providence, never wanted to be part of his Washington world. He used to make jokes about her being small town, even though he grew up here too. He couldn't understand why she was satisfied teaching school when she could have done more with her life. That's what he said at her funeral, that she could have done more. Not that what she did was enough. Not that teaching and touching lives and making a difference in her community was valuable. But that she could have done more. The courtroom is utterly silent. Several people in the gallery are wiping their eyes. Judge Caprio's expression has shifted to something profound, not pity, but deep understanding mixed with a kind of righteous sadness. And you internalized that message, Caprio says quietly. That nothing you do is ever quite enough. That service without status doesn't count. That being good isn't the same as being great. That love and human connection are somehow less important than titles and achievements. Madison nods, unable to speak. The judge looks down at his bench for a long moment, collecting his thoughts. When he looks back up, his eyes are glistening with unshed tears of his own. Let me tell you something, Madison. I've been a judge in this courthouse for decades. I've seen every kind of person you can imagine stand where you're standing right now. Rich people, poor people, educated people, people who never had a chance at education. People who made mistakes because they were greedy, because they were desperate, because they were angry, because they were lost. And you know what I've learned? The measure of a person isn't their title or their bank account or their last name. It's what they do when nobody's watching. It's how they treat people who can't do anything for them. It's whether they add light to the world or drain it away. He stands up again, and this time he walks completely around the bench, descending the steps that separate him from the courtroom floor. It's an unusual move, one that causes the bailiff to shift nervously, unsure of protocol. But Judge Caprio is beyond protocol now. He's in pastor mode, teacher mode, grandfather mode, all the roles he naturally fills beyond just being a judge. He stops a few feet from Madison, maintaining appropriate distance but closing the gap enough to make his next words feel personal, intimate, important. Your grandmother, Rose, she understood something that too many people forget. She understood that teaching a child to read, showing them they matter, giving them hope when they're struggling, that's not small. That's enormous. That's how you change the world, one person at a time. And you've inherited that from her, whether you realize it or not. Those children in the hospital, those families facing their darkest hours, when you show up for them, when you bring them comfort and distraction and care, you're doing sacred work. You're living out the legacy she left you. Madison is openly sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. Her expensive attorney looks completely out of his depth, clearly having expected a very different kind of hearing. Judge Caprio gestures to the bailiff, who brings over a box of tissues. The judge takes them and hands them to Madison himself. Here, he says gently. Take your time. There's no rush here. We're going to figure this out together. Madison accepts the tissues, dabbing at her eyes, trying to compose herself. I don't know how to tell my father, she finally says. He's going to be so disappointed. Everything he's worked for, everything he's built, I was supposed to be part of that legacy, and I've failed him. Or maybe, Judge Caprio suggests, returning to the bench but keeping his posture open and engaged, you've succeeded at something he doesn't know how to value yet. Maybe you found your own path, your own purpose, and it doesn't look like what he expected. That doesn't make it failure, Madison. That makes it life. That makes it growth. That makes it real. He picks up a paper from the file, studying it carefully. These hospital volunteer coordinators, I'm looking at letters here that were submitted to the court by the volunteer services departments at 3 different hospitals. Letters I don't think you even knew about. Would you like to know what they say? Madison looks up, startled. Letters? I don't understand. Judge Caprio puts on his reading glasses again, and there's something ceremonial about the gesture, as if he's preparing to reveal something significant. He holds up the first letter, letting Madison and the rest of the courtroom see the official letterhead of Rhode Island Hospital. This first one is from the Pediatric Oncology Unit, he begins, his voice taking on the formal tone of reading official correspondence, though his warmth never disappears. It says, and I quote, "To whom it may concern, we are writing on behalf of a volunteer who has become an irreplaceable part of our care team. Madison, who has been volunteering with us for the past 6 months, has shown extraordinary dedication to our youngest and most vulnerable patients. She arrives without fanfare, asks for no recognition, and gives selflessly of her time and energy. She has a particular gift for connecting with children who are withdrawn or frightened. We have seen nonverbal patients begin to speak when she reads to them. We have seen terrified children calm down when she holds their hand during procedures. We have seen families on the brink of despair find moments of joy and normalcy because of her presence. When we learned she had legal troubles, we felt compelled to share that in her time with us, Madison has demonstrated character, compassion, and commitment of the highest order. Whatever mistakes she has made, they are far outweighed by the good she does in our halls every week." The courtroom erupts in murmurs. Madison's hand is over her mouth again, tears streaming freely. Her attorney is staring at the judge in obvious shock, clearly having had no knowledge of these letters. Judge Caprio looks up from the page, making eye contact with Madison over the top of his glasses. "You didn't know they wrote this?" She shakes her head, unable to form words. He picks up the second letter. This one is from Hasbro Children's Hospital. It's shorter, but no less powerful. "Madison has been a light in our darkest corners. She shows up for shifts other volunteers won't take, the overnight hours, the hardest cases, the moments when families need someone but have no one. She has sat vigil with parents whose children are in surgery. She has celebrated birthdays for kids who might not see another one. She has brought art and laughter and humanity into rooms filled with fear and pain. She is one of the finest human beings we have had the privilege to work with." Now people in the gallery are openly crying. The bailiff has turned slightly away, rubbing his eyes. Even the court reporter has paused, clearly affected by what she's hearing. Judge Caprio sets down the second letter and picks up the third. And this final one, from Women and Infants Hospital, it might be the most remarkable of all. It was written by a mother whose daughter was in the NICU for 3 months. "Should I read it, Madison?" Madison nods, tears dripping onto her expensive blouse, her whole body trembling. "Dear Judge," Caprio reads, his own voice now thick with emotion, "my daughter Sophia was born 3 months premature. The doctors gave her a 30% chance of survival. For 92 days, I lived in that hospital. I slept in a chair by her isolette. I watched machines breathe for her. I prayed every minute of every day. And I was alone. My husband couldn't get time off work, my family lives across the country, and I had no friends in Providence. I was drowning in fear and exhaustion and isolation. Then Madison appeared. She was volunteering in the NICU, and she asked if I needed anything: coffee, food, someone to talk to. I broke down. I told her I couldn't do it anymore, that I was falling apart, that I had no one. And she stayed. Not for an hour. Not for an afternoon. She stayed with me through the night. She held my hand when I couldn't hold my babies. She read to Sophia through the isolette, soft stories about brave little girls. She brought me meals. She sat with me during the worst scares. She celebrated with me during every tiny victory, the first time Sophia breathed on her own for 5 minutes, the first time she opened her eyes, the first time she gained an ounce. Madison never told me her last name. She never wanted anything from me. She just gave and gave and gave. Sophia came home last week. She's going to make it. And I honestly don't know if I would have made it without Madison. When I heard she might be in trouble, I had to write. Because whoever she is outside that hospital, inside those walls, she's an angel. Please be kind to her. She saved my life. The courtroom is utterly silent except for the sound of crying, not just Madison now, but people throughout the gallery, the bailiff, even the judge himself, who takes off his glasses and wipes his eyes unashamedly. Madison has collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. Her attorney, looking completely overwhelmed, puts an awkward hand on her shoulder. Judge Caprio descends from the bench again, and this time he walks directly to Madison. He crouches down slightly, not easy for a man his age, but he manages so he's at her eye level. "Madison, look at me," he says softly. She raises her head, her face swollen and streaked with tears, her carefully applied makeup completely ruined. "You asked me earlier what matters here," Caprio says, his voice gentle but firm. "You said you broke the law, that you showed contempt, that consequences are what matter. But I want you to understand something crucial. Justice isn't just about punishment. Justice is about understanding the whole person, the whole situation, the full context of someone's life. And when I look at you, I don't see a criminal. I see a young woman who's been carrying impossible expectations, who lost the one person who truly understood her, who felt suffocated by a life that didn't fit, and who responded not by becoming destructive or selfish, but by finding a way to serve others. Yes, you made mistakes with these parking tickets and court dates. Yes, you need to address those. But those mistakes don't define you. Your actions in those hospitals define you. The lives you've touched define you. The mother whose hand you held through the darkest night of her life, that defines you." Madison is staring at him, tears still flowing but her expression transforming from shame to something else, something like hope, like recognition, like the first glimpse of forgiveness, not from him but for herself. "I failed, though," she whispers. "I failed law school. I failed my father. I failed to be who everyone expected me to be." "No," Caprio says firmly. "You failed to be who they expected you to be. But you succeeded in discovering who you actually are. And the person you are is remarkable. The person you are has been doing the work your grandmother did, the work that truly matters, touching lives, bringing comfort, showing up for people in their most vulnerable moments. That's not failure, Madison. That's success of the highest order. That's a life of meaning." He stands up, his knees protesting slightly, and returns to the bench. "Now," he says, his tone shifting to something more businesslike but still warm, "we need to address the legal matters that brought you here. We have the parking violations, the missed court dates, and the contempt charges. And we're going to handle them. But we're going to handle them in a way that acknowledges who you are and what you've been dealing with." Madison stands up, wiping her face, trying to compose herself for what's coming. The entire courtroom leans forward, waiting to hear what Judge Frank Caprio is going to do. Judge Caprio takes his time organizing the papers before him, creating a moment of suspense that's almost theatrical. But anyone who knows him understands this isn't about drama, it's about being thorough, being thoughtful, getting it right. He looks up at Madison, who's standing straighter now, having found some measure of composure though her eyes are still red and swollen. "Madison Ashworth," he begins formally, "you came before this court today facing multiple serious charges. $4,000 in parking violations, 3 missed court appearances, and contempt of court. Under normal circumstances, with this pattern of disregard for court orders, I would have every reason to impose significant penalties, possibly even jail time for the contempt charges. Madison nods, accepting this, bracing herself for what's coming. However, Caprio continues, and his voice softens again, these are not normal circumstances. What I've learned today is that while you were violating parking regulations, you were also spending hundreds of hours serving the most vulnerable members of our community. While you were missing court dates which you absolutely should not have done, you were holding the hand of a terrified mother whose baby was fighting for life. While you were accumulating fines, you were reading stories to children with cancer, bringing joy into rooms filled with suffering. He pauses, letting his words settle over the courtroom. Now, some people might say that doesn't matter. That the law is the law, and good deeds don't excuse violations. And there's some truth to that. We can't have a society where people simply ignore legal obligations, no matter how noble their other actions might be. So I want to be very clear, Madison, what you did was wrong. Ignoring those tickets was wrong. Missing court dates was wrong. You can't do that. You understand that, right? Yes, Your Honor, Madison says quietly. I understand. And I'm sorry. I believe you are, Caprio says. And I also believe you're at a crossroads in your life. You're carrying a secret that's eating you alive, the fact that you left law school, that you've been hiding from your father, that you've built this whole separate existence. And I want to talk about that for a moment, because I think it's connected to everything else that happened here. He leans back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Madison, I'm a father. I have children, grandchildren. And I can tell you something about parents: we want the best for our kids, but sometimes we get confused about what best means. Sometimes we project our own dreams onto them. Sometimes we measure success by markers that don't actually lead to happiness or fulfillment. Your father is a United States Senator. That's a significant achievement. But you know what? Some of the most impactful people I've ever met never held public office. They were teachers, like your grandmother. They were nurses. They were volunteers. They were people who showed up day after day to do unglamorous work that changed individual lives. Madison is listening intently now, her tears slowing, her breathing steadier. I can't tell you what to do about your father, Caprio continues. That's your decision to make. But I can tell you this: living a lie, no matter how well-intentioned, is corrosive. It eats away at you from the inside. These parking tickets, these missed court dates, they're symptoms of a bigger problem, which is that you've been trying to live two lives at once, and that's unsustainable. Eventually, truth has a way of coming out. Better that it comes out on your terms, in your time, in your words. He picks up his pen, preparing to render his judgment. So here's what we're going to do. For the parking violations, I'm reducing your fines from $4,000 to $1,000. The hospital letters demonstrate that you were genuinely serving the community during the times these violations occurred, and while that doesn't excuse the violations, it provides context that allows me to use discretion in sentencing. Madison's attorney starts to speak, probably to say thank you, but Caprio holds up a hand. I'm not done. For the missed court appearances and the contempt charges, I'm going to dismiss them entirely. A gasp goes through the courtroom. Madison's eyes widen in shock. Even the prosecutor, who's been silent throughout this hearing, leans forward in surprise. Now, before anyone thinks I've gone soft, Caprio says, a slight smile playing at his lips, let me explain my reasoning. The purpose of contempt charges is to ensure respect for the court and compliance with court orders. But contempt can also be remedied when someone comes before the court, shows genuine contrition, and demonstrates that they understand the seriousness of their actions. Madison, you've done that today. More importantly, you've shown through your volunteer work that you have deep respect for human dignity, for service, for showing up even when it's hard. Someone who sits through the night with a scared mother in a NICU understands commitment. Someone who reads to children fighting cancer understands what really matters. I believe you've learned what you needed to learn, and further punishment serves no purpose. Madison is crying again, But these tears are different tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that might be the beginning of healing. However, Caprio says, his tone becoming more serious, this comes with conditions. First, you will pay the reduced fine of $1,000 within 90 days. Second, you will continue your volunteer work at the hospitals for at least another year. I'm making this an official requirement of my sentence: 200 hours of community service at the medical facilities where you've already been volunteering. Of course, knowing you, you'll probably do triple that anyway. A ripple of laughter moves through the courtroom, breaking some of the emotional tension. And third, Caprio continues, and now his voice takes on a more paternal quality, I want you to promise me something. Not as a legal obligation, but as a personal commitment. I want you to have an honest conversation with your father. I want you to tell him the truth about leaving law school. I want you to tell him about the volunteer work you've been doing. I want you to tell him about finding your grandmother's house and why you needed to be there. And I want you to tell him about discovering that your path might be different from what he envisioned, but that it's no less valuable. Madison nods, wiping her eyes. I promise. I'll tell him. I don't know how he'll react, but I'll tell him. He might surprise you, Caprio says gently. Parents often do. And if he struggles to understand, give him time. Change is hard for everyone. But living your truth, Madison, that's not negotiable. That's essential. Not just for you, but for everyone who depends on you being authentic. Those children in the hospitals, those families facing crisis, they need the real you, not someone playing a role or hiding who they are. He gathers his papers, preparing to conclude the hearing. Before I dismiss this case, I want to say one more thing, and I want everyone in this courtroom to hear it. We live in a world that's obsessed with achievement, with status, with external measures of success. We celebrate people who accumulate wealth, power, fame. And there's nothing wrong with ambition or achievement. But we can't forget to celebrate the people who show up in quiet ways. The people who volunteer their time. The people who sit with the sick. The people who teach children. The people who comfort the grieving. The people who do the unglamorous work of being present for others in their moment of need. He looks directly at Madison. Your grandmother Rose understood this. She spent 40 years teaching children, touching lives, making a difference one student at a time. She didn't make headlines. She didn't accumulate power or wealth. But she built something more important. She built a legacy of love and service that lives on in the hearts of the people she touched. And now you're building that same legacy. Every child you read to, every family you comfort, every hour you spend in those hospitals, you're continuing her work. You're honoring her memory in the most beautiful way possible. His voice breaks slightly, emotion overcoming him for a moment. He clears his throat, continuing. So yes, you made mistakes with these parking tickets and court dates. But you also made choices that reveal your character. You chose service over comfort. You chose compassion over convenience. You chose to show up for people who needed you, even when you were struggling yourself. And that's who you really are. That's the truth of Madison Ashworth. He brings down his gavel, not hard, just a gentle tap that signals resolution. Case dismissed, with conditions as stated. The court finds that justice is best served not through punishment but through recognition of the complete person standing before us. Madison, you're free to go. But I hope you'll stay in touch with this court. I'd like to know how your conversation with your father goes. I'd like to hear about the children you're helping. And I'd like you to know that whenever you doubt yourself, whenever you wonder if you made the right choices, you can remember this day. Remember that a courtroom full of people saw the real you, and what we saw was extraordinary. Madison walks toward the bench, and for a moment it seems like she might try to hug the judge, but propriety holds her back. Instead, she places her hand on the bench, and Judge Caprio places his hand on top of hers for just a moment, a gesture of connection, of understanding, of blessing. "Thank you," she whispers. "Thank you for seeing me." "Go be who you are," Caprio tells her. "The world needs more people like you. The world needs more people like your grandmother. Don't let anyone convince you that the work you're doing is small or insignificant. It's everything." As Madison turns to leave, escorted by her still stunned attorney, Judge Caprio calls after her. "And Madison? When you talk to your father, tell him I said he should be very proud of you. Not for the things he expected you to achieve, but for the person you've become. Tell him Judge Caprio in Providence said so." Madison nods, manages a watery smile, and walks out of the courtroom. The gallery erupts in applause, highly unusual in a courtroom setting, but no one stops them. The bailiff is wiping his eyes. The court reporter is reaching for tissues. People in the gallery are hugging each other, strangers connected by this shared moment of witnessing something profound. Judge Caprio sits back in his chair, emotionally exhausted but satisfied. Another case resolved. Another person seen, truly seen, for who they really are. Another opportunity to balance law with mercy, justice with understanding, punishment with compassion. As the courtroom slowly empties, one elderly woman approaches the bench. She's been sitting in the gallery, a regular attendee of Judge Caprio's sessions. "Your Honor," she says softly, "I just wanted to thank you. My granddaughter just started law school. She's scared she won't be good enough, that she's not cut out for it. I'm going to tell her about today. I'm going to tell her that there are judges who still believe justice is about people, not just rules." Caprio smiles at her, tired but genuine. "Tell her that the law is a tool. A powerful tool, but just a tool. What matters is the hand that wields it. Tell her to be fair, to be kind, to always look for the whole story. Tell her that every person who comes before her will be someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. Tell her to never forget that." The woman nods, tears in her eyes, and walks away. The courtroom is empty now except for Caprio and his bailiff. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing what just happened. "That was something," the bailiff finally says. "That was everything," Caprio corrects him gently. "That was why we do this job." He picks up the 3 letters from the hospitals, reading them once more. A senator's daughter who walked into his courtroom with arrogance and walked out with humility. A young woman who thought she was a failure discovering she's been succeeding at what matters most. A granddaughter honoring her grandmother's legacy in the most beautiful way possible. Judge Frank Caprio closes the file, places the letters carefully inside, and prepares for the next case. Because there's always another case, another person, another opportunity to see beneath the surface, to find the humanity in every situation, to balance the scales not just with law but with love. And somewhere across Providence, Madison Ashworth sits in her grandmother's house, surrounded by letters from former students, and begins to write her own letter, this one to her father, choosing truth over fear, authenticity over expectation, and her own path over anyone else's definition of success. The story that began with contempt ends with grace. The defendant who entered angry leaves transformed. And justice, true justice, has been served not through punishment, but through recognition, understanding, and the profound simple act of seeing someone for who they really are.